Aberdeen, Pierre, Chamberlain, Huron, Watertown, and then the strong winds tomorrow night could cause some freezing or icing. Now here in southeastern KELO, Sioux Falls area, rain or even a thunderstorm. Yep, it's possible with all that wind coming in. Could be a severe thunderstorm, believe it or not. Overnight tonight, we'll see lows in the 20s in the north, the low 30s here in southeastern KELO, where that fog is going to be more prevalent. Then tomorrow, the eastern half of KELO, the right side of your screen, warming to the 40s, or in the case of Sioux Falls, even the 50s. Western South Dakota will be much cooler. That is the cold front that's going to give us the rain, then mixing with or changing to light snow, northern and western South Dakota. And we're talking light, under an inch of snow, but the winds will have an impact. Could see some freezing or icing tomorrow, late in the day, and tomorrow night. We'll have more on that and the rest of the week in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Jay. In Pierre this morning, the former director of the South Dakota Appraiser Certification Program tested before the state legislature's Government Operations and Audit Committee. It's in regards to Governor Kristi Noem's daughter, Cassidy Peters' pursuit of certification to become a residential appraiser in the state. Today, Sherry Bren said she was surprised to see other attendees at the July 2020 meeting held at the governor's mansion. Bren added that she was nervous, felt intimidated at the meeting. Noem maintains that at no time did her daughter receive special treatment. When lawmakers asked Bren today if she was asked to retire, she says she was forced to leave the job. We will have more on today's hearing coming up on KELO News at 6.
COVID-19 hospitalizations in South Dakota are at the highest they've been all year. Today, the state is reporting 284 people are hospitalized with the virus. The last time that many people with COVID-19 were in South Dakota hospitals was December of 2020. State health officials also confirmed that 4 more people with the virus have died. Meanwhile, the health department also confirmed more than 700 new cases of COVID-19 today. But the number of active infections went down to about 7,200. Vaccinations remain at more than 66% of people 5 and older. They've received at least 1 dose. Nearly 56% have completed their vaccinations, and nearly 19% have received a booster shot. Professional sporting events are also struggling to stay ahead of the coronavirus. 4 more players from the Carolina Hurricanes are now in the NHL's COVID-19 protocol. That's leading to the postponement of their game against the Minnesota Wild. The Hurricanes are the 4th team this season to have games postponed due to an outbreak. Well, buying beef may cost you a little more, but cattle producers, they're not the ones seeing the increase. Who's actually benefiting ahead?
Plus, making a difference in the community, one blanket at a time. Ahead in tonight's Positively KELOland.
Well, believe it or not, we could see some thunderstorms tomorrow. In fact, over in Iowa, they could see some very strong thunderstorms. Everybody gets lots of wind during the day. We'll have a complete forecast next.
The exclusive sponsor of KELOland News.
Not only what happened on January 6th, but the actions that were taken by Meadows and others connected to the former President Donald Trump that led to what happened here on January 6th. Wolf?
I'm sure there's a lot more in those documents that were made available as well. Ryan Nobles, thank you very much. There's a lot to discuss with our chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, CNN special correspondent, Jamie Gangel, senior political analyst, David Gergen, and legal analyst, Elliot Williams. Jamie, let's talk a little bit about Meadows. He once served in the House of Representatives. He was sort of well-liked, not only by Republicans, but Democrats as well. How significant is it now that he's about to be held face these criminal contempt charges?
It's historic. It really is. And this is not where Mark Meadows wanted to be. He started cooperating because he really did not want criminal contempt. He opened the door. He handed over these documents without privilege. And I think it is fair to say Donald Trump was not happy. He did not want anyone in his inner circle testifying, certainly not his former chief of staff. And I think Meadows got scared. He withdrew. He stopped cooperating. And now he finds himself in a situation he did not want to be in, and a historic one for a former member of Congress and chief of staff.
You know, it's interesting, Dana, because the committee in their statements, public statements last night and today, laying out a lot more details right now. What are you specifically looking for as you watch the remainder of this process unfold?
Well, one of the things that's going to be interesting to see is how the votes come out when we actually see the votes taking place. We expect most, if not all, of the Democrats to vote yes. We obviously expect Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, the two Republicans on the Select Committee, to vote yes. But how much bigger will the Republican vote be? Will it be any bigger? Will you have some of the 10 Republicans who voted for impeachment, aside from the other 8, I should say, aside from Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney? We don't know the answer to that. But it has been noteworthy to watch the way, the passion of all of these members of the committee. They're speaking because they're so outraged. Not in spite of the fact that he is a former member of Congress, but because of the fact that he is a former member of Congress. And he genuinely is somebody who was well-liked across the aisle. He did work with Democrats, despite being conservative, despite being the chair of the Freedom Caucus for a while. And they're just really disgusted, clearly, with the fact that he is not complying with what he understands is a necessity.
He knows better.
He knows better, and we know he knows better because we know what he said when the shoe was on the other foot, when he was trying to get information.
He was the ranking member of the Oversight Committee.
Yeah,
so he knows better. Understands what a congressional subpoena is all about. David, if the U.S. Justice Department does decide to prosecute Meadows, he'll be the first White House chief of staff to face criminal charges since Watergate. So what does that say about this unprecedented chapter right now in America's history?
The fact that it's been so long, this big gap since Bob Haldeman under the Nixon administration was forced to resign and then eventually went to jail. He was chief of staff to Richard Nixon, but we haven't had nothing like that since. I think it only underscores just how big and major these developments have become. This is really, we're into big league damage here that's being done by Donald Trump to a lot of the people around him, including Mark Meadows, whom I think is going to pay a fearful price for this, but say Fox News. The fact that Fox News appears to be just an arm of Donald Trump, an arm of the Trump White House, that when you've got a question about where to go in a White House and you're at the news bureau, you don't talk to your newsman, you go to the White House to get instructions. I think speaks volumes about how far off track the Trump team got. And frankly, it's going to cast more clouds over the prospect of him running for president in 24.
You know, Elliot, how much of a legal, uphill battle potentially will there be if the Justice Department goes ahead and prosecutes Meadows?
Right. It's a great question, Wolf, because, look, this is not the same case as Steve Bannon, who violated the subpoena from day one, never showed up, and so on. Mark Meadows did at least try to comply for a little bit, turn documents over, and so on. If you look at how the committee approached this, both in their hearing last night, in their comments today, and in their written report, what they've done is lay out the places where he has no claim for executive privilege. So that's number 1, text messages with other people. Number 2, a trip down to Georgia. Number 3, communications with Georgia state officials. All of these things are areas in which no White House staffer would have had executive privilege. So what they did was essentially create a roadmap for the Justice Department saying, in effect, look, this guy might be White House chief of staff and might have had communications with the president that are protected, but we're not worried about those communications. These are the problematic areas in which he violated the law. And so it's not really uphill to prosecute him.
It's really interesting. We're told, by the way, the debate on this issue on the House floor has now formally ended. They're going to go on to some other business. Then they'll come back and have a roll call, and they'll vote, and we'll see what happens. We'll have live coverage, obviously, of all of that. But last night and today, the text releases, the messages that Meadows either got or sent, very dramatic. I'm told, though, that this is only just the beginning. Wait till you see, all of us see, a lot more.
Right. I mean, just starting with the responses, if there were responses from Mark Meadows back to them, what was he saying? Because we have to always remember the context when you're talking about messages. This was obviously very dramatic, and it was the ultimate crisis. But more broadly and generally, when you're talking about communications to and from Donald Trump, because he doesn't text, because he doesn't email, people who are used to trying to get in touch with him do so to the people around him. This was the way that they communicated. So the fact that he was getting these, SOS texts from journalists, from reporters, from members, from reporters who are in the building, was remarkable. But the question is, what was going on behind the scenes? And the fact that you have the former Vice President's National Security Advisor, Keith Kellogg, who was in the room with the then president when this was happening, testifying today. It's an indicator of what you just said, Wolf, that we're focused on Meadows, which is understandable because they've released so many texts, but there's so much we don't know, but they are learning every day.
There's a lot about to unfold on the House floor. Everybody stand by. We're going to have a lot more. The breaking news continues as we await the formal House vote on holding former Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in criminal contempt of Congress. Plus, new questions right now about just how effective the Pfizer vaccine is against the new coronavirus Omicron variant. Stand by.
Against pneumococcal pneumonia.
Explain your policy and treat you with respect. That's the Trusted Choice Pledge. We put it in writing.
Policy, which begins by stating, quote, the administration supports
control of your symptoms and
National Islamophobia Act.
Reciting their story, seeking to inspire us to act and take that step towards safe storage, taking nobody's gun away. These measures take no one's gun away.
The system sucking up moisture from the Pacific Ocean is expected to dump more than 8 feet of snow on the highest peaks of California and Nevada. And this is a live look at Las Vegas. Speaking of Nevada, one of the big stories there tonight from Fox 5, the city's airport is renamed after former Senator Harry Reid, the longest-serving senator in Nevada history, retired in 2017. He calls it the greatest of honors. The facility had been known as McCarran International Airport after the late Senator Pat McCarran. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
Too fast to take that test.
Communications. Meadows was also someone who led the charge against, yes, there's always some hypocrisy in here, something that looks a lot less important than this, but is relevant. He was looking for those other emails back in the day.
On March of 2015, Secretary Clinton publicly said, and I quote, "I opted for convenience to use my personal email account, which was allowed by the State Department." How difficult would it be to comply with the law, the Federal Records Act, if you are using your personal email account? What would you have to do?
Well, he can answer his own question because he wasn't complying with it in one of the most important jobs in government. I'm joined now by Maya Wiley, a former civil prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, for the legal side of this. Welcome back, Maya.
Good to be with you, Ari.
Boy, a little bit of procedural jarring, which I emphasize to viewers. We're learning about some of this piecemeal because Mr. Meadows is trying to have it both ways. He has contradicted himself and been hypocritical. I say that as fact, not as criticism. Whether the sum total of all the evidence may ultimately help him is an open question because we haven't seen it. Whether, for example, on January 6th, he came around to what some of those people were texting him. We just don't have all the evidence yet. But walk us through legally what we're eyeing tonight, which is Democrats say they have the vote to hold him in contempt. Then what?
Well, look, you know, once they have this vote, which is likely to pass, there's going to be referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it is going to be the U.S. Attorney's Office that makes a decision about whether to take it to a grand jury, and it'll be the grand jury's decision whether to indict. But look, this is a case where at the beginning of it, I think there are some lawyers who rightly say this is more difficult than Stephen Bannon because, one, he did some cooperating. He did turn over lots of records. He was in negotiations with the committee. Steve Bannon had just said, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not even going to negotiate whether I will talk to you. So they can't say he did nothing, and he was, in fact, a direct advisor to the president around the incidents they want to talk to him about. So it gets closer to executive privilege. But look, what we have to remember is, one, we already have an appellate court that has said, no, there's no executive privilege here, because President Biden, under the law, said, no, there's no interest to protect here. But let's also remember, because what was so powerful about what you laid out, Ari, and the way you summed up what we have learned through this process and what the committee itself shared with us last night, is the implication that even as an advisor to the President of the United States, we're more in the land of U.S. v. Nixon. We're more in the land of whether or not there is an actual crime to investigate that the president was part of, and you just don't get the claim privilege around whether or not you were committing a crime.
Right, and a crime that was in service of trying to end American democracy. Sometimes the words sound so serious or grand that they might sound like hyperbole. And on the day of January 6th, there was still a lot being uncovered and figured out. We're here approaching a year anniversary with a lot more evidence, and that's what it was. It was this coup plot. And so that's very important. We also showed how Sean Hannity himself seemed concerned enough to privately lobby Mark Meadows, and they apparently have the kind of relationship where Mr. Hannity just says what he thinks the government or the president should do, and then goes back out and pretends to report on it as if he's more independent than he is. I say that by way of caution and handle with care. Mr. Meadows, who's perfectly invited to come on this program, decided to go talk to Hannity about some of this. Take a look.
The hyper-partisan, predetermined outcome anti-Trump January 6th committee just voted 9-0 to hold Mark Meadows in contempt for refusing to comply with their orders. We already know this is a predetermined outcome. Didn't we learn that when they kicked Jim Jordan and Jim Banks off the committee?
This is not about me holding me in contempt. It's not even about making the Capitol safer. We see that by some of the selective leaks that are going on right now. This is about Donald Trump and about actually going after him once again, continuing to go after Donald Trump.
So, Maya, a handicap where we go from here. In public, they have their pretend volleys about this. In private, they have their own communications that we actually got a little bit more of a look at. And then legally, what is Mr. Meadows' timeline for trying to use what might be potentially valid claims, or as you said, those arguments of privilege, to run this out?
Yeah, well, look, you know, sometimes the Justice Department can move very quickly, a grand jury can move very quickly, and you can get a trial very quickly, and hopefully that's what happens here. Certainly, I think the effort is to run it out. Just remember the point that I think Representative Cheney made so effectively last night. Claire McCaskill pointed this out. What she really said was, look at the timeline. Mark Meadows was complying. He was turning over all these documents until his book. And then his book comes out, and then suddenly he's not talking anymore, and he's not going to cooperate. But yet he's publicly talking, but he's only talking to the spin room for Donald Trump. And that is simply thwarting Congress when there are all kinds of reasons why these communications aren't privileged, and they should be allowed under their constitutional power. As Jamie Raskin said, Representative Raskin said, if we can't do it here, when will we ever be able to do it? Because it's central to what we have the right to figure out whether we can stop insurrections in the future and how to do that. So I do think there is a lot of imperative here for this to move quickly to get to resolution, because it is so critically important and because it does implicate a crime. And there's one fact that I wish the committee had spoken to last night, although I thought they did a very clear, systematic job. But at the same time, all those texts are coming from Donald Trump Jr., from our Fox News friends, from members of Congress. Donald Trump was calling senators, asking them to slow the electoral vote down while all this was happening, while he knew there was violence, and while he wasn't taking action.
Right, and that's a key point, because, again, some of this might all look very flimsy, but in a world where the combination of violence, chaos, and those Republicans who wanted to ally themselves with parts of this in a world where they didn't do the certification. Everyone wakes up on the 7th, and they're here claiming, well, look, didn't happen. Maybe there's some larger legal question. Maybe Pence can do this or that. As you drag that out, you're getting closer to the 20th. You can see the outlines of something that many Americans prefer to think of as unthinkable and that the military clearly was not going to support, but that had a lane. It's just not a lane they ultimately achieved. Maya Wiley, thank you as always. Let me tell everyone what's coming up, because this is a lot of breaking news, but it's not the only breaking news. The New York Times just crossing the wires with a story about new developments in the criminal case against Trump in New York. We have that. And going out to the wider politics and the weird, wacky world of covering Joe Biden's first year. Well, our friend Sheikh Homanduri is here with a look at the expectations game. All that will continue to track what many are calling a historic night in the Congress. Accountability, potentially, for January 6th.
At Intracellular Therapies,
it charges and goes to trial ultimately against these parents. They'll say, look, it is legal. It is permissible for you to own a weapon, for you to give your child that access to that weapon. But it is not legal if you know that your child has a mental illness, has a disorder, is more predisposed to using that weapon against other people illegally. And if you do that, then that is evidence that you've engaged in reckless behavior that is so beyond the pale that even though your conduct underlying this, that is owning a weapon, which is legal, even though that conduct is legal, the way you gave your child unfettered access to that weapon, given what you knew or should have known his mental condition to be, is illegal.
Randy, there's a diner owner who Ethan worked for. They said they didn't see anything troubling or odd with him, and they've added that what the parents did to him was child abuse. Is that a perception in the community? And if it is, do you think that goes into this case and what the jury might ultimately think? And I guess, you know, what does the parents' role, if any, have on how their son is ultimately perceived or prosecuted?
Well, I think the allegations are so heinous, they are so shocking, they are so outrageous, that I think short of either an insanity defense or an incompetency defense, there's very little that this young man can do to foist the blame on his parents. It's really the problem of the parents to be more concerned about whether or not the actions of their child are going to taint them and infect them, because I do agree this was a very difficult charging decision. It is a very creative charging decision, because to accuse the parents of basically pulling the trigger, I think is a very difficult road to hoe.
What's the youngest they could? What's the youngest they could use
here?
What's the youngest they could use insanity, Randy?
Well, certainly, and keep in mind that insanity is a very narrow defense, which is I was unable to appreciate the nature and the circumstances of my behavior. I was unable to appreciate the difference between right and wrong. And one of the ways that an insanity defense gets dispensed with quite easily is you go through each and every step that the defendant took to commit the crimes that were committed. And the more intent there is, the more difficult it is to demonstrate that I didn't know what I was doing.
All right, let's get you on another case. Trent, you've been with us, I know, on some of the Kim Potter testimony, and let's get you some of what happened today in the courtroom. There was a commander who testified about the difficulty of being a police officer today. Let's listen.
Is it incredibly more difficult nowadays to be a police officer than it was when you first started out?
I think so, yes.
More guns?
I see more guns more frequently now than in 2000.
And when you do a traffic stop, that's a very dangerous stop, is it not?
They can be, yes.
And that's because you don't know if the individual you stop has a gun or not.
Correct.
So, Trent, we've talked again about this, whether, you know, they think this is an issue for the officer, the taser versus the gun. What do you think in the end this comes down to? Was it reckless? Is that the question?
That's the ultimate question, Joe, and I don't think anyone in this jury will see it any other way. Oh, again, like our last case, this is also a very challenging case. And remember, all these cases that we've seen, these officer-involved shootings of unarmed African-American men, people of color, this is perhaps the most challenging, because what the defense is trying to do, and you heard it there in that piece, they're trying to tell this jury, listen, I'm going to put you in the shoes of this officer when she showed up at this scene. This is an incredibly violent area. You never know when you approach a vehicle what you're going to encounter. It could be a weapon. And so what they're trying to do is to traumatize this jury in the same way that this officer, as a result of her years of experience, her years of being on the street, is somewhat traumatized too. She's sensitized and maybe overly sensitized to the idea that she has to protect herself and that she has to be capable and aware of her circumstances and capable of defending herself at all costs.
All right, we will continue to follow both of these trials and continue to count on you both for outstanding insight as always. Attorney Trent Copeland and former prosecutor Randy Zellin, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
A bombshell in the case of a former NFL player who killed 6 people and then himself. Phillip Adams had severe CTE. We'll talk with the doctor who made that finding. She has a lot to say about what the NFL needs to do to prevent more cases like this. And we're going to also speak with a former player who is still waiting for his part of the league's massive brain injury settlement despite an agreement reached 2 months ago. What's the holdup? That's ahead.
Clear skin at 4 months had lasting clearance through 25 years of production. What it means for those taking part in tonight's Eye on KELOLAND.
The KELOLAND.com Game of the Week returns tonight with the Lincoln boys taking on Harrisburg. Tonight's game will be a season opening contest for both teams as they saw their original season opener postponed due to last Friday's snowstorm. The Game of the Week tips off around 7 p.m. and you can watch the action on KELOLAND.com.
Speaking of snow, the 5th thing you need to know, Terry Peak plans to open for the season tomorrow at limited capacity. Terry Peak says crews will continue to make snow whenever possible to get more areas open for the season. The lodge, rental shop, mountain shop, and restaurant will also be open.
We'll see increasing clouds and increasing winds during the day tomorrow. Sioux Falls, rainy and 55. A mix of rain and snow north and west with highs only in the 40s, but very strong winds for everybody.
Thank you for joining us.
Have a great evening.
Tonight, we are watching a major new storm system that could bring high wind and rain to areas already devastated by the tornado outbreak. The search for more than 120 people still missing as thousands remain without heat, water, and electricity less than 2 weeks before Christmas. Tonight, the sad news that at least 13 children are among the victims. The heartbreaking story of a 3-year-old boy lost.
I wish I could have saved my son. Everything was just falling on top of us.
The Trump text. Tonight, why Donald Trump Jr. was urgently messaging the White House Chief of Staff on January 6th. And so were 3 Fox News hosts, as Congress takes a vote to hold Mark Meadows in contempt for refusing to cooperate. A new weapon in the fight against COVID, the possible game-changing antiviral pill. Could it prevent severe disease and protect against the Omicron variant? Cuomo ordered to return millions. The news about the disgraced New York governor and the $5.1 million he made off his pandemic memoir. Holiday shipping deadline. Still haven't gotten that gift out? Well, all you need to know to make sure your presents arrive on time for Christmas. And American kindness. Neighbors turning the Mayfield Fairgrounds into a place to find help for those who lost everything.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. We are going to begin with the most heart-wrenching witness accounts we have heard since that once-in-a-century outbreak of tornadoes across America's heartland. In Kentucky tonight, the state is in a rescue and recovery mode with more than 120 people unaccounted for. But the governor says he believes that number is even higher. Residents are trying to pick up the pieces in what could be a years-long recovery. Experts say insurance losses from the destructive tornado tornadoes could reach $5 billion across 6 states. The death toll now stands at 88, and we're now learning that includes at least 13 children, including 9-year-old Aniston Rackley from Missouri. This photo was taken as she sheltered in place inside a bathroom with her 2 sisters just moments before the storm hit. Well, President Biden today approved an emergency declaration for counties in Tennessee and Illinois where that Amazon warehouse collapse claimed 6 lives. The president also declared an emergency for Kentucky a couple days ago, and he'll visit the state on Wednesday to survey the damage. And that's where CBS's Lilia Luciano will lead off our coverage tonight in Dawson Springs. Good evening, Lilia.
Nora, good evening. Everywhere you look here, the devastation is just disorienting. Nothing makes sense, and so many people are still missing. The Kentucky National Guard and FEMA are assisting in the search over here for any signs of life. And today we traveled to an even smaller town that lost 6% of its population in just one night. Cattle rancher Danny Miller says he has seen tornadoes in his lifetime, but none like the one that took the lives of his brother Billy and his wife.
They lived in a double wide, it just exploded, I reckon. They said they was found outside the house, laying on their sides, facing each other.
They were always together. So that's the way they went home.
Danny and his wife Jane say they depended on Billy to keep Lost Valley Farm, which has been in the family for 4 generations. But when the tornado killed 40% of his cows, he said he wanted to quit.
But we hadn't lost this many at one time.
It's hard to make it on a small farm, especially to depend it on. Your total livelihood comes from it.
The tiny community of Bremen, Kentucky suffered great loss. At least 11 people were killed in a town of 200.
We still definitely are in rescue and recovery. We have people missing. I still expect that we will find at least some more bodies. There is just so much destruction. I hope that that's not the case, but it's still an expectation.
At least 17 people died here in Hopkins County. There's an urgent search and rescue mission for more than 80 people who are still unaccounted for.
All right, let's break. Let's go get it. Let's finish this up today.
Dave Jardin and his volunteer group Sheepdog Impact Assistance hit the ground in Dawson Springs soon after the tornado struck to provide natural disaster relief.
We're all veterans. We're all first responders. We've seen bad things. If we find a body, it's going to be a bad day. If they find a body, it could be very well be a neighbor, friend, family, loved one. It would be an excruciatingly bad day. So if we can take that off their plate, and we'll shoulder that as far as not letting them have to.
Danny Miller, whose small cattle business was devastated, told me he won't quit after all because he's thinking about the next generation. I asked him, what would you tell President Biden, who's going to be around here tomorrow? And he says, we need help. Nora.
They do need help. I'm so thinking of the Miller family. Thank you, Lilia. Well, we want to turn now to one of the hardest hit communities, the town of Mayfield, Kentucky, where 8 people lost their lives when the town's candle factory was destroyed. But as CBS's David Begnaud tells us, there was also a 3-year-old boy killed in the storm.
I wish I could have saved my son. Couldn't.
Huda Alabahi's heart is broken. Her son Jaleel is dead. Last Friday night, when the tornado alarm went off on her cell phone, she grabbed Jaleel and her youngest son, Julius, and ran into a bathroom closet.
By that time, everything was just falling on top of us.
The tornado obliterated the 100-year-old home that she's rented for 5 years.
Where were the babies?
Right here. One was in this arm and one was in this arm. I never saw my 3-year-old because my face couldn't turn that way, but I did see the baby, and he cried, and then he just stopped. So at that time, I thought he was gone, but he wasn't.
While penned under the rubble, Alabahi says she never heard Jaleel make a sound.
Did Jaleel die in your arms?
He did.
Jaleel Dunbar was one of at least 12 children in Kentucky to die because of these tornadoes. While Jaleel died in his mother's right arm, Huda's 1-year-old son Julius was untouched in her left arm. It is unfathomable to her how that could have happened. But then again, so too is this.
I don't care about anything in this house. I just need to figure out how we're going to move forward without him, you know.
The tornado that obliterated Huda's home also destroyed the homes of her aunt and her mother. Nora.
I know we met Huda's aunt when we were there, and I'm just so thinking of that family and thinking of Huda. David, thank you. Well, tonight we are tracking a cross-country storm that could hit tornado-ravaged communities with heavy rain and damaging winds. Just think about that. Tomorrow, southern Illinois and Kentucky could get gusts up to 50 miles per hour. Across the plains, gusts could hit 70 miles per hour. Rain is likely every day from Wednesday to Saturday. Seems cruel. And tonight, there's wild weather in the west. Floodwaters sent an empty car floating down the LA River, and in Orange County, neighborhoods near an area burned by wildfires were evacuated because of mudslides. All right, we're also learning more tonight about what then President Trump knew during the January 6th insurrection on the Capitol. His chief of staff turned over more than 9,000 text messages, but when the congressional committee investigating the riot asked for his call records, Mark Meadows stopped cooperating. Well, that's why the House is set to vote to hold him in contempt. CBS's Chris Van Cleve reports from Capitol Hill.
Tonight, Mark Meadows is poised to become the first current or former House member voted in contempt of Congress in nearly 200 years for refusing to cooperate with the January 6th committee.
And it seems like a tiny handful of people who think that somehow they're above the law because they know a former president of the United States. And I'm sorry, that's just not how our legal system works. We have no kings here.
The vote comes after Wyoming Republican Liz Cheney read startling text messages Meadows received on January 6th, pleading with him to get former President Trump to stop the Capitol assault, including from Donald Trump Jr.
He's got to condemn this shit ASAP. Donald Trump Jr. texted again and again, urging action by the president. Quote, "We need an Oval Office address. He has to lead now. It has gone too far and gotten out of hand."
Also texts from several Fox News hosts who just hours later would publicly downplay the insurrection, including Laura Ingraham.
"This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy."
And Sean Hannity.
"Can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol."
Cheney suggested the former president may have illegally obstructed an official proceeding of Congress, which is a felony.
Did Donald Trump, through action or inaction, corruptly seek to obstruct or impede Congress's official proceeding to count electoral votes?
Monday night, the former White House chief of staff addressed the move to hold him in contempt.
This is not about me holding me in contempt. It's not even about making the Capitol safer. This is about Donald Trump and about actually going after him once again.
The Justice Department will ultimately have to decide whether Meadows would face a criminal contempt charge similar to Steve Bannon. Today, General Keith Kellogg, who was Mike Pence's national security advisor, met with the January 6th committee for a deposition. He was reportedly with former President Trump on January 6th. Nora?
So many new details emerging. Chris Van Cleve, thank you. Well, now to the latest in the battle against the coronavirus, where doctors may...
Wolf. So sad, those pictures, those families dead. May they rest in peace. May their memories be a blessing. Brian Todd, thank you very much. If you want to help tornado victims, and I hope you do, go to cnn.com/impact to learn ways you can impact your world. It is so important. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at the rise in gun violence here in the United States, exactly 9 years after one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history at the Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Get help manage. Continuing to look at the efforts to revitalize the Sioux Falls neighborhood. Yesterday, we brought you the story of Pettigrew Heights and the improvements that are being planned for the area.
Tonight, we're focusing on the vision of one man willing to invest in the future of the neighborhood, along with a longtime resident doing his part to improve the community. Beth Warden joining us in studio with more on that. Good evening, Beth.
Good evening, Sam and Brian. A corner store at 9th and Grange is getting a new life thanks to a visionary who believes that Pettigrew Heights is a neighborhood worth investing in. The former grocery store, built in 1905, was converted to a duplex in the 60s. As this portion of the city core shows signs of revitalization, Alex Hallback is developing the property and acquiring tenants for a coffee shop or restaurant on the main level, office space on the second, and a rooftop patio for his patrons. His hope is that others will restore properties from downtown to this new anchor point.
I really truly believe that when you take on a building like this, that you're just a caretaker for the property for the period of time that you own it until you pass it to the next caretaker. And so I feel like when you do projects like this, you make a commitment to the building and to the neighborhood to do it right, and that's the only way to do this.
All under 10 years old.
You can still hear their cries, their screams when you're taking care of them.
I just rocked him. That's all I know to do. I'm a mother, so I gravitate towards those babies.
Their father, Charles Cook, says 2 of the boys set out to find help after the family was thrown into a field more than 100 yards away.
Your children saved your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And David, President Biden will be here in Kentucky tomorrow to get a first-hand look at the damage here. And the White House says to ensure that the federal government is doing everything to get assistance to impacted areas like this one as quickly as possible. David.
All right, Elwin Lopez staying on the scene there for us. Elwin, thank you. And as I mentioned a moment ago, that storm system now moving west to east, going to hit that region again, already battering the west at this hour, flooding, rain, and mudslides in California's Silverado Canyon. People rescued from their homes today. Extreme snow and wind shutting down parts of I-80. This is near Soda Springs, California. Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z back with us tonight, timing all of this out for us. Hey, Ginger.
Hey, David, more than 5 feet of snow already making its way through the Sierra. There's still a bit left. Los Angeles, so parched usually, had more than 2 inches of rain, a daily record. But the storm is now going to turn into the Rockies and beyond. It's going to be all about wind for millions of folks. 40 to 70 mile per hour gusts from the Texas Panhandle and Colorado all the way up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So watch for that, but also watch for record highs. We're talking about dozens of them, and not just daily records, but all-time December record heat possible tomorrow. When that happens, just like we saw last week, it's inevitable you get severe storms. This time, I think southern Minnesota, parts of Iowa could even see tornadoes. And then that same area hit so hard, David, could see flash flooding as this front slows down.
Yeah, we know what happens when the front hits that record warmth. Ginger, thank you again tonight. We're going to move on to the other news this evening and to the autopsy tonight on former NFL player Phillip Adams. That autopsy now revealing he was suffering from an unusually severe form of brain disease, CTE, when police say he killed a prominent doctor, his wife, and 4 others before taking his own life. Here's Steve Osunsami.
A medical examiner is confirming suspicions tonight and helping to answer why this former NFL cornerback killed 6 people, according to police, and then killed himself in April.
We've got 4 down. 4 down inside the house.
In the shocking mass murder, Phillip Adams killed Dr. Robert Leslie, a well-known local physician, killed the doctor's wife, 2 of their grandchildren, and 2 workers outside their South Carolina home. Dr. Ann McKee, who examined Adams' brain, is blaming CTE, a degenerative brain disease, saying that this case was unusually severe, stage 2, where the patient is often aggressive, explosive, or paranoid. She says his brain looked a lot like the brain of Aaron Hernandez, the former NFL tight end who was convicted of murder and died by suicide in prison.
We are finding some comfort in the CTE results and the explanation they provide for the irrational behaviors pertaining to this tragedy.
CTE is found in people with a history of head trauma and can only be officially diagnosed when a person is dead. Tonight, Adams joins a growing list of former NFL players who struggled with the disease. At the time of the killings, Adams' father told WCNC in Charlotte that he blamed his son's football career.
I think the football messed him up.
Adams was just 32 years old when he died, had played in nearly 80 NFL games over 6 seasons, and his family says that he struggled with injuries his entire career. David.
Steve Osunsami tonight. Thank you, Steve. Tonight we have learned the FBI is now investigating after the disappearance of a cruise ship passenger who fell overboard on a Carnival cruise. The company
Brian?
Hey, Joe. Yeah, you know, these big stores like Target and Nordstrom and Costco, they get a lot of attention. But what's sad is when it happens to small businesses, and that is happening too. It happened twice. You mentioned it, to one business, one small business, a small luxury retail store here in Miami. The owner saved up. He was finally able to open his store over the last year. He even had to get a small business loan, only to be smashed into 2 times. And he says what made him especially mad is one of the burglars was actually out on bond when he busted into his store. Listen to what the owner told us.
It was a little bit disappointing because, this wasn't handed to us. We really worked years and years to be able to get to this point. I mean, I've been selling sneakers since 2007, 2008. So we were finally at a point where we were able to afford our own brick and mortar location. So just for someone to try to take something that we worked so hard for.
You got to feel for him. Now he's had to pay a security guard to be at his store pretty much around the clock. Other stores are also getting creative. Kroger, the grocery store chain, they've programmed their shopping carts basically so they can't go beyond a certain point. So shoplifters and organized retail thieves can't run off with items inside the carts. A lot of people see the videos. They get frustrated that the theft detection employees don't go after the robbers. I spoke to one of the theft detection employees at a big box store. Didn't want to show his face for 2 reasons. Number one, was afraid he'd get in trouble. Also said he's actually afraid of the shoplifters because sometimes they even threaten them.
That's I had not seen that, Brian. Actually, I thought I got kind of a kick out of the last one there. Who just sort of waved off the cart and was like, all right, I give up. Brian Hinton, thank you for the report. We appreciate it. Let's get more now from Sheriff Vernon Stanforth of Fayette County, Ohio. He heads up the National Sheriff's Association.
And these economic challenges will not worsen, and instead we can get the country back on the right track.
I mean, you could certainly make the argument, because as many have, that local officials aren't doing enough and the prosecutors aren't doing enough. Where do we start?
It does start locally. The local agencies know their communities. They know how to address a lot of those issues, but they're not getting any support from their from some prosecutors and from further on up the chain, even as far up as the President of the United States. The law enforcement has been hogtied. We're not allowed to do anything, and things that we can do, we operate in fear that everything we're going to do is going to get us sued.
How does it go all the way up to the president, Sheriff?
Well, the president needs to demonstrate leadership, and he hasn't come out yet as a strong leader. And when it comes to crime fighting, now, we know Senator Biden was big on crime, but President Biden has not been big on crime, and that's what we need. We need the president to come out. Not the vice president, not the cabinet secretaries, not the press secretary, but the president of the United States need to be addressing the American people and how his office, his administration can fight this crime.
You say it starts locally, though, Sheriff. I'm curious, in these cases like Brian Hinton just showed us, there was someone who broke into the store who was out on bond. I mean, judges have to set bond. The question becomes, right, how do you set the bond in an area that makes it, I guess, effective and makes a point? But as you know, there are a lot of county sheriffs who like the fact that a lot of these low-level crimes aren't filling up their jails. It seems like a tough road to walk, and enforcement is what people want.
There has to be a balance in the crime that's being incarcerated.
Vaccinated, but there's a measure of also concern about these mandates and how they're affecting different aspects, as you take another look at that video of the vigil up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, Brett, I mean, the vaccines, the mandates in particular, as you say, have certainly become controversial and have been very political. I think that you won't see this White House giving up on that stance, even though they have been challenged in the courts. I think they're going to continue to go forward with that. The president made his decision to go with vaccine mandates earlier this fall when he decided that he needed to use more of a stick instead of a carrot approach to getting people to get vaccinated. But it has certainly been something that Republicans in particular have pushed back on, and it's become a political liability, at least to some extent, for this president.
Wall Street Journal on the labor shortages bill, quote, labor costs in the industry have soared and hospitals struggled to retain enough nurses, technicians, even janitors to handle higher hospitalizations in recent months as the Delta variant raged. Thousands of nurses have left the industry or lost their jobs rather than get vaccinated. As of September, 30% of workers at more than 2,000 hospitals across the country surveyed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention were unvaccinated. We saw what Amtrak did, saying you could get tested, not vaccinated, in order to keep labor so the trains could keep running.
Yeah, Amtrak, Joe Biden's former mode of transportation. Yeah, that's the price of coercion. You know, this seems to be the default position of this administration and the governor.
Or taking certain medicines which may interact with kappa nuva.
Tell your doctor if you have a bleeding condition or take
trust. Right, girl?
Our weather tomorrow will apparently include rain, snow, thunderstorms, thunder snow, and maybe even the possibility of a tornado for the middle of December. Tyler Roney's final forecast when we come back.
Dakota News Now is sponsored by Dakota Sioux Casino and Hotel.
Serve and teach our children the value of freedom. Reach across America.
Iowa and up into southern Minnesota. So ahead of this big storm system that's going to be taking shape, we do have record warmth. That's going to help fuel some of the storm chances. We're talking about some extremely warm temperatures tomorrow. A lot of record high temperatures likely falling. Increasing moisture. So this is going to draw up a lot of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico straight up to the north, and combined with those very strong winds aloft, that's not only going to power some of these storms, but it's going to cause them to race off to the east. Some of the storm motion we could see tomorrow will be incredibly fast. And what that means is that if you find yourself under a warning, and we're talking about this line specifically through Iowa down through Kansas City, if you find yourself under a warning, just make sure you take quick action, because this is going to be moving really fast.
Of that $2 trillion expenditure actually went to COVID-19. Less than 1% went for vaccines.
Continue to get the food they need to survive.
If we and that he was lighting small brush fires.
MSG, can he get it done? I'd say so, but we will certainly set the table. Plus, we're reacting to the latest news. Woj will join us. James Harden, now in the NBA's COVID protocol, ahead of the Nets game versus the Raptors.
Than they were before, and defensively, that's where this team is different. Offensively, they're
clubs, hard-fought.
That no one knows about. Okay. I was going to do something about cooking. I like to cook.
Tears are in your eyes. Come on and come to me now. Don't be ashamed to cry. Let me see you through. 'Cause I've seen the dark side too. When the night falls on you, you don't know what to do. Nothing you confess could make me love you less. I'll stand by you. I'll stand by you.
Enjoy 30 days of freshness, wrinkled skin in just 2 days.
Let your Chevy dealer take you there with
the best place to be is together. And we went to meet the first responders, the doctors treating the victims, the smell of candles when they arrived at the hospital.
An extra level of surreal was the smell in the ER, because one patient would smell like Christmas cookies and the other one would smell like cinnamon, and it was really bizarre.
Rescuers were saying they could smell the vanilla candle in the air.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, at one point, gingerbread flooded through the ER, and we realized we had more patients coming in. So it's
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Those doctors did not give up, and one of the patients, Jim Douglas.
How you doing, Jim?
You'll remember he told us he was trapped at the very bottom of that twisted steel at the candle factory. The rescuers forming a human chain to pull him out.
What would you say to them now?
What I want to say, thank you. I mean, all of them. I just thank God every one of them was there. From nobody else, from me, you guys. Thank you. You don't even know me, and you risked your life because it was dangerous, every one of them, and I truly appreciate it.
And the grandmother, Tina, huddled over her grandchildren, 3 years old and 14 months, and the sign on part of the wall still standing, Amazing Grace.
You gotta believe. There's so many people that lost their lives, and I'm just thankful. That's why I tell everybody, I said, you know, we're thankful that we still have our lives. We can rebuild.
We were so moved by their strength, and we'll stay on it. Good night.
Right now at 6 o'clock, months after a report that Governor Noem's daughter received special treatment following her failed attempt at getting an appraiser's license. The woman who sat across the table in a meeting with the governor testified today before lawmakers.
Workers short.
Count on Dakota News Now to have it first.
Austin Goss broke this story over the weekend.
The only station with a newsroom in Pierre.
Quiet night coming our way, but tomorrow night things are going to be a lot more active. Anyway, here's this evening's evening planner. Mostly cloudy throughout, 38 right now, and temperatures.
State Capitol.
Participants here today came from as far as Sioux Falls and Rapid City.
Political news when you want it with Dakota News Now. Get the latest news now every weekday morning on Dakota News Now.
Toyotathon is on with
with President Biden on the phone the second day in a row, but not much movement here, Wolf.
See what happens. At least this year, running out. Right. Jeff Zeleny, thanks very much for that report. And to our viewers, thanks for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer. Aaron Burnett out front starts right now.
Breaking news tonight, the critical vote on holding former top Trump aide Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress. The House voting on referring Meadows to the Justice Department for criminal charges for defying the January 6th committee and the newly revealed text messages from Fox News hosts and the then president's own son pleading with him to help stop the Capitol violence. Also tonight, the search growing more desperate after that tornado outbreak. More than 100 people still unaccounted for in Kentucky. Inside the hospital with a worker trapped in a collapsed candle factory. How she survived, and heartbreak for a Missouri family. The image of their 3 young daughters sheltering minutes before the tornado hit. One of the girls tragically dying. Plus the new tornado threat on the move. Promising news on Pfizer's COVID pill. How effective is it? Will it work on the Omicron variant? And the first major study on Omicron. How severe is it? And how well does the vaccine work against it? Our NBC News investigation into retail theft rings. Our cameras there for the undercover sting. In the race to deliver the holiday shipping deadlines to get your gifts there on time. And inspiring America, neighbors helping neighbors after that tornado tragedy.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. A political act of loyalty and defiance is facing its reckoning tonight over getting to the bottom of one of this country's darkest days. The House of Representatives voting this evening on the question of whether former Donald Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows should be referred to the Justice Department for a charge of contempt of Congress. Meadows has flatly said he won't testify about the January 6th attack, frustrating efforts by a special House committee to understand what was transpiring in the White House as rioters were seizing the Capitol. But text messages Meadows did hand over to the committee appear to show the depth of his involvement in the effort to overturn the election, then to stop the deadly attack. Garrett Haake has breaking details.
Tonight, the House voting to hold Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress, a mostly party line vote expected to refer the former Trump Chief of Staff and their former colleague to the Department of Justice for possible prosecution.
We won't let the facts be buried by a cover-up.
This is as wrong as it gets. You all know it. But your lust for power, your lust to get your opponents is so intense, you don't care.
Meadows defying a September subpoena demanding he testify before the January 6th committee. First saying he'd cooperate, then changing his mind, citing executive privilege claimed by the former president.
I've tried to share non-privileged information, but truly the executive privilege that Donald Trump has claimed is his to waive. It's not mine to waive. It's not Congress's to waive.
But before he stopped cooperating, Meadows turned over text messages revealed by the committee last night, including pleas for Meadows to help stop the attack while it was happening from Mr. Trump's own son, Don Jr.
One of the president's sons texted Mr. Meadows, quote, "He's got to condemn this ASAP."
And from Fox News hosts.
"He is destroying his legacy," Laura Ingraham wrote. "Can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol," Sean Hannity urged.
Trump Jr. declined to comment about the texts. Fox News has not yet responded to requests for comment. In a separate exchange, a lawmaker texting that the vice president should throw out some electoral votes he finds unconstitutional. After, another texts the chief of staff with an apology. Quote, "We tried everything we could in our objection to the 6 states. I'm sorry, nothing worked."
And Garrett, Meadows faces a year in jail if the Justice Department goes forward with charges. Meantime, I know there's news with another legal case involving the former president. What do you have?
That's right, Lester. Late today, a federal judge threw out a lawsuit from former President Trump that sought to block the Treasury Department from handing over his tax records to a House committee that has sought them. The former president now has 2 weeks to appeal. Lester?
Garrett Haake at the Capitol. Thank you. Let's turn now to the tornado disaster. The death toll stands at 88 tonight, most of them in Kentucky, with many still unaccounted for there. Gabe Gutierrez now with the latest on the victims and an incredible story of survival.
Tonight, days after tornadoes sliced through multiple states, there are still more than 100 people unaccounted for in Kentucky alone.
We have people missing. I still expect that we will find at least some more bodies.
In Bowling Green, 11 people from 2 families died on one street.
Everything else you can replace, but family you cannot.
Here in Mayfield, this debris, of course, will be here for some time. All of this used to be a steakhouse, but today utility crews scrambled to install row after row of power poles, trying to get back at least some sense of normalcy. While in Missouri, a gut-wrenching picture. Smiling 9-year-old Aniston Rackley is seen clutching her favorite doll while sheltering in a bathtub with her 2 sisters.
They knew where they were going to be in their safe spot.
15 minutes after her parents posted this photo, Aniston died in the tornado that ripped through her home.
She was a wonderful, wonderful little girl. And I'm going to miss her so much. I already do.
In Kentucky, we met survivor Michaela Emery in her hospital room. The 21-year-old says she'd worked at that candle factory on and off for 3 years. The monster tornado hitting during the night shift.
The only thing I remember after that is I heard all kinds of noises, and the next thing I know, I open my eyes and I'm stuck. I can't move my legs.
So all this concrete had just fallen on top of you?
Literally a wall, like a concrete wall was on top of me.
Did you think that you would make it out alive?
I honestly did not think that they were going to find me.
In the darkness, under that concrete slab, she spoke to her pregnant friend and prepared for the worst.
There's no telling how long we're going to be under here. By the time they do find us, we'll be dead. I'm not going to be able to breathe. We're losing oxygen. That's what was running through my mind the whole time.
They were trapped for 6 hours. First responders eventually pulled her and her pregnant friend from the rubble.
The only thing that I could think about the whole time I was underneath her was getting her and her baby out alive.
And they did get out. But another co-worker who she'd spoken to right before the storm did not.
I mean, it hurt so bad, and there's nothing that I can do, but that was my friend, and that still is my friend.
Gabe, I have to tell you, I shuddered at that report of 100 people still unaccounted for. Is it possible some are staying other places and haven't been able to get in touch?
Yes, Lester, it's possible someone reported them missing and just haven't been able to get in touch with them. The hope is that that number will drop. But as the governor points out, his expectation is that the death toll will rise, Lester.
Deadly. All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. As they struggle to recover there, a powerful new storm system could bring tornadoes to parts of Iowa and Minnesota tomorrow. Minnesota, by the way, has never had a tornado confirmed in December. Dasha Burns reports from Kentucky on the shifting tornado landscape.
In Bowling Green, Kentucky, no words can describe the devastation.
You can see that these two houses are gone, and then the houses in front of them are gone, so you can directly see the path moving right straight through there.
As the community grieves, many are asking why.
This is the largest event ever in December in terms of severe weather and tornadoes.
Experts are working to understand what fueled these monster storms.
This is very unusual.
Josh Durkee is a meteorology professor at Western Kentucky University. What happened here?
There was a widespread area conducive to severe weather. There was warm air ushering in a lot of moisture in the lower levels of the atmosphere, and the wind shear set up an environment for storms to tap into that environment and thrive.
The unusual nature of the storms have many wondering if this is a result of climate change.
Climate change is a very complex discussion.
While Durkee can't definitively say climate change is the cause of these storms, he says they may be a consequence. One of the main causes, spring-like temperatures in December, 20 to 30 degrees above the average for this time of year. Could we see more of these storms because of these warming temperatures?
There are changes in the spatial distributions of tornadoes as well as the tornado frequencies. We are seeing more and more of these types of events that are related to things like climate change.
There may also be a change to what's traditionally deemed Tornado Alley. Experts say it's moving east. Could we see tornadoes start to impact new places, different places?
Absolutely.
That means more people should get prepared.
I'm going to be working tirelessly to help people find ways to protect themselves, to get the warning, to have a plan, to get low and save your family's life.
Bowling Green never expected to experience anything like this, but experts say as these storms become more frequent, more and more communities are going to have to make plans to keep themselves safe. Lester?
All right, Dasha Burns tonight. Thank you. Now to the pandemic, and good news from Pfizer today about the effectiveness of its COVID pill, but it could still be weeks away from authorization, and it comes as infections and hospitalizations soar to alarming levels. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
As hospitals buckle under the strain of COVID, Pfizer's antiviral pill, if approved, could protect against Delta and Omicron, reducing the risk of hospitalization or death by 89% when taken within 3 days of the onset of symptoms. But it won't come soon enough for the soaring number of medical centers facing record admissions. At UMass Memorial, they ran out of ICU beds a week ago.
I'm shocked that Massachusetts is in this situation. We are the most vaccinated state in the country, and yet here we are in a surge of COVID that's just as bad as where we were last year at this point.
As Delta devastates lives, the more contagious mutation of Omicron, on its way to becoming more dominant in the U.S., has now been found in at least 33 states. The CDC says genomic surveillance shows the variant detected at a rate of 3% nationally, but at 13% in parts of the Northeast.
What we're seeing in some of these other countries is doubling times of about every 2 days or so. So really rapid increase in the amount of Omicron that's out there.
A year ago today, the first shots went into arms in what many hoped would be the beginning of the end of the pandemic.
I need to be very clear. Vaccines alone will not get any country out of this crisis. It's not vaccines instead of masks. It's not vaccines instead of distancing. Do it all. Do it consistently.
Now companies like Kroger are ending some benefits for the unvaccinated. The NFL requiring boosters for staffers after a spike in positive cases. NYU becoming the first major university to require boosters for students and staff. And at Cornell, where Omicron has been detected, school officials are shutting down campus. Tonight, an evolving pandemic with a revolving cost. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
In just 60 seconds, our investigation will take you inside a sting showing how criminals are reselling billions in stolen goods, and we'll ask what's being done to stop it. Plus, holiday shipping, the deadlines, and what you need to know. Grab a calendar.
Remember the Another nice day across KELO.
Yeah, the snow is still there, but it's definitely melting, Jay.
Yeah, definitely melted. We had above average temperatures across all of KELO during the day today. Sioux Falls made it all the way to 39 degrees, but things are going to get changed tomorrow. We'll start with a strong south wind and return to a strong north wind by tomorrow night. This is what it looks like right now at Falls Park, looking more like a winter wonderland with that coating of snow. 38 degrees, though, so the snowpack is diminishing. There'll be a light south breeze, and that's going to hold up temperatures during the overnight hours. Here's what's coming for tomorrow. It will be windy. Now, it could start with some morning fog due to the snow melt. Otherwise, a mostly cloudy day. There may be a few bits of sunshine during the morning hours, but mostly cloudy during the day. Sioux Falls, ahead of this incoming low pressure system, a strong south wind will get back into the 50s. The rest of the area, a north wind, only the 40s, northern and western South Dakota. And there could be some light rain. Even Sioux Falls, some light rain. A few tenths of an inch. Sioux Falls could maybe get a ½ an inch of rain tomorrow. Then there is this for tomorrow evening. Tomorrow night, very windy. Gusts to around 60 miles an hour will be possible. Some strong thunderstorms will even be possible here in southeastern KELO with those winds coming on in. And northern and western South Dakota, as the cold air is driven in by the north wind, rain will change to light snow northern KELO, but it will be very light, well under an inch. On Thursday, behind this system, partly to mostly sunny, breezy west wind, low to mid 30s, so temperatures will drop back down to normal. Then the weekend, Friday, partly to mostly cloudy skies, could be some light snow showers north and west, but just light snow showers. It's going to be colder, highs in the 20s to the low 30s. Saturday for the weekend looks really cold, even though skies will be mostly sunny, highs only the upper teens to the low 20s. Sunday a little bit warmer, the low to the mid 30s. Here's a look at the highs we had during the day today. Made it all the way.
I guess there's what is the Justice Department going to do? It's more complicated than Bannon. And then there's the court process. And where do you think this ends up?
Well, I mean, the thing is, once you put this in the hands of a judge, it kind of, the Congress loses control of this. And so that's part of the problem, is that, you know, we're never going to hear Steve Bannon's story, probably, unless you listen to his podcast. And in the case of Meadows, I do think that Meadows, you know, he's in a different place for various reasons. One, I think he doesn't really want to go to jail, so I think he wants to find a way to find an accommodation, which is why he's pursued this very muddled legal strategy that Laura really pointed out. Look, he does have a better place, a better claim of privilege than Bannon did, but you know, he has produced all these documents. So one of the things he's going to argue is that, look, we produced all of these documents that we believe are not privileged, and so we are cooperating. And it does I think it does make it a little more difficult for the Justice Department to go after him. And you know, they've got decades of precedents inside this building to give deference to this idea that close advisors of the president have a better claim of privilege than other people. So I do think it makes him, it puts him in a different place. But in the end, I think he really doesn't want to go to jail. So you know, perhaps what this does is it prompts him and his lawyers to get together with the House lawyers and find a way to reach an accommodation.
And do you think that happens, Laura? And I mean, I don't want to presume, but obviously one accommodation that would just make complete logical sense would be for him to answer questions about the 9,000 pages he handed over, right? I mean, apple for apple, right? An eye for an eye. I mean, of course. Well, of course, the idea that you are going to produce documents and not be able to answer them. Remember, subpoenas are quite specific. And one of the things that Congressman Benny Thompson spoke about today when challenged on this issue of why not compromise further, why not indulge a little further, it was he said, well, he was subpoenaed to actually sit for a deposition. And the leverage at stake here is not in the hands of somebody who is the recipient of the subpoena. The person who issues the subpoena really sets the parameters for the conversation, and they have asked in a particular medium and a vehicle for communication. And so to the extent you want to compromise on the time, place, and manner of the actual presentation of the testimony, you do have that sort of leverage to do so. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if Congress has issued a valid subpoena based on its legislative and oversight authority, the idea that somebody could come in, unlike a layman who you know could not, and say, you know what, here are the terms of my compliance. Yeah. That is really more towards what you saw in the past several years about thumbing their nose. You're not in control here. You're no longer a member of Congress. It's no longer your subpoena, and those who have the power to issue it did so on their own terms. Governor, one just point to make, I think, to follow up on all of this, right? It's what Trump did leading into this. It's what he did on that day. It's actually what he did not do on that day, right? But here's what he did the other day, actually 2 days ago, speaking toward this weekend with Bill O'Reilly. Doubling down on the lie, doubling down.
I was disappointed only in one thing, but it was a big thing. Mike should have sent those crooked votes back to the legislatures to approve, and you would have had a different result in the election, in my opinion. I think Mike has been very badly hurt by what took place with respect to January 6th. I think he's been mortally wounded, frankly, because I see the reaction he's getting from people.
So, Governor, even now, 13 months after he lost, 11 months after January 6th, Trump is siding against Pence. Pence has been mortally wounded.
Well, you know, Mike Pence, you know, look, thank God he did what he did, but he had no choice because that was what the Constitution says. So pinning a gold star on him is not my idea of a great reward. But let me tell you something else, Aaron, and I hesitated to say it, but I need to tell you this. A source has indicated to me that in this redistricting, where they draw the districts for Congress, if you put two Republican congressmen together potentially, they begin to draw a district more favorable to that congressman who has sided with Donald Trump in the fact that the election was stolen. If you dared to speak out and say that is nonsense, you could have your district taken from you. So it's even now in the bowels of the Republican Party, and it needs to be flushed out, because if it is not, it can begin to destroy that Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, because what we have witnessed since that election that Donald Trump lost.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time. And as I said, we are anticipating that vote any moment, and we're going to keep an eye on the members of the GOP, right, who had voted in favor of contempt for Steve Bannon. There were 9 members of the GOP on that night. We will see how many there are in these next few minutes as we watch that with you. Next, a Wisconsin Republican slamming her own party for ordering a secret review of the state's 2020 election.
This is a charade, what's going on with this constant drumbeat of all the massive voter fraud.
I'm going to speak to an election expert next who says that what is happening right now in Wisconsin has him most worried about democracy in the U.S. And Dr. Anthony Fauci warning the Omicron variant is on the verge of becoming the dominant strain in the United States as the CEO of the investment firm Morgan Stanley reverses course completely on returning to the office. And the death toll climbing after those devastating tornadoes. We are learning more tonight about those who lost their lives.
I brought in
experience since 1920. Member FD
has said they want to be completed by spring or the 2022, and there's another election. So I can't imagine that court resolution of issues involving executive privilege would occur before that time frame.
Still a lot of questions. A lot of questions out there about what the committee will be able to get. Jonathan Schaub, University of Kentucky Law School, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
During last night's hearing, committee vice chair Representative Liz Cheney read text messages sent to Mark Meadows on January 6th from some of President Trump's closest allies. The text messages showed concern and an urgent request to the president to stop the siege of the Capitol. Some of those allies included key Fox News personalities like Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham, who later that day, however, suggested the crowd was not made up of Trump supporters.
Quote, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy, Laura Ingraham wrote.
Earlier today, the Capitol was under siege by people who can only be described as antithetical to the MAGA movement. Now, there were likely not all Trump supporters, and there are some reports that Antifa sympathizers may have been sprinkled throughout the crowd. We'll have more on that later.
To talk us through the role Fox News plays in all this, I'm joined by NPR's media correspondent, David Flokenflick. David, welcome back to the NewsHour. So as you listen to and read about these text messages and then what these Fox News anchors said in the aftermath, what does it all add up to in your mind?
Well, it tells you the central role that Fox News played throughout the Trump presidency. It tells you, in a sense, that they don't see any distinction between advising the president, trying to champion his reputation, champion his standing, champion perhaps his aims and goals from their own supposedly journalistic endeavors. They may be opinion hosts, but if you work for a news organization, you're supposed to acknowledge, even as opinion journalist, facts that go contrary to your rooting interest. They seem to have done none of that in terms of what you saw, a brief clip of on the air and in other clips throughout. And it also tells you that they know. They knew that this was a problem. They knew this was serious. They knew this represented a crisis, in a sense, a challenge, a violent challenge, the peaceful transfer of power that was supposed to be ceremonially certified on that day from President Trump to his successor, then President-elect Joe Biden. And it tells you yet they nonetheless were willing to say something quite different to the millions of viewers who turn to them and rely on them on a daily basis. I think that tells you that they don't see their loyalty to the truth. They don't see their loyalty to their viewers' need to understand the facts as they are, but to perhaps serve their appetites and their political rooting. It's a very different journalistic mission than you and I embrace. I don't think it's, in fact, a journalistic mission at all.
And in terms of what we knew about, we've known in the past they've spoken favorably of former President Trump for years. But does this take it to a different level, do you think?
I mean, you know, it shows you how there's no wall, no membrane separating Fox News and its primetime lineup and political opinion stars from the President Trump's closest circle of advisors. Sean Hannity was an advisor from the outset of the Trump candidacy into the White House. Laura Ingraham, for that matter, Tucker Carlson, who doesn't appear in this particular roster of text messages as sent to Mark Meadows. Nonetheless, I think what it does is sharpen the disconnect between what we know that Fox News stars know when they're purveying conspiracy theories, supporting the former president's most outlandish claimings, and in fact, amplifying, projecting, and embracing lies that are corrosive to Americans' understanding of their own civil society, that they know better, that they knew the person they turned to was the chief of staff to President Trump because he was the person best situated to try to diffuse this incredibly tense and violent situation. Even as hours later, you know, Laura Ingraham and others are on the air blaming Antifa, claiming somehow that there might be deep state plans of FBI informants for which there's been no credible proof in any meaningful way. And so I think that what you have here is a question of Fox News having that word news appended to its name, but not operating like a news operation. You're not seeing any authority being brought to bear. Yes, they are starting, you know, more than 24 hours after this was released by Liz Cheney on the committee to address this in their own coverage on the news side. And Sean Hannity talked a bit about it on his radio show today, but not in a way that keeps faith with the viewers and the listeners, their audiences, and the public to say the truth comes first, even when it cuts against what we want to have happen.
And what do you think the consequence, why does it matter? I mean, as you said earlier, it's certainly different from the kind of journalism we do at the NewsHour and many the other journalistic organizations we're familiar with. But why does it matter? I mean, we know we are in an era of opinion. There's a lot of opinion out there in news coverage and news reporting. What effect does something like this have, do you think?
Listen, Fox has always played an outsized role in Republican politics, increasing over the years, ever since its founding in 1996, and leadership under Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes. Right now, you have something like, what, 3/5 of registered Republicans or so claim that they believe that Joe Biden won the election fraudulently, which is not true, and disproven in countless ways in courtrooms and political officials, both Democratic and Republican. And the reason they do that is because an echo chamber is provided by Fox News and sort of its lesser peers, and it gives amplification to and ballast to not only former President Trump, but those around him and those who seek to ride his coattails to power and to office by having them say, well, this is a message that will work for us, and therefore we will lie about things. We will mislead the public. We will raise concerns, and we will, by the way, deny, deflect, dismiss, or denounce claims of any involvement of people in the Trump circle or people with loyalty to President Trump or just support for him with what happened on January 6th, even at the same time as they claim that what happened January 6th.
Republicans, elected Republicans in Wisconsin, agree.
David Folkenflik, who covers the media.
Alleged actions obviously do not reflect on his peers at CNN. But I'll be honest, I'm getting really tired of being moralized to, lectured to about what is good and what is moral by people that don't seem to have a clue, by an organization engulfed in scandal. Joining me now to react, Buck Sexton and Clay Travis, the host of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. Guys, good to see you. I think I have to start with you, Clay, because I believe you were banned from CNN for using the word boobs.
Yeah, well, I said that I believed in the First Amendment and boobs, and that was totally unacceptable to CNN. I believe I'm still banned for life for saying that. And
lie. Yeah. They have still not, in over 400 days since the 2020 election, they have not been able to develop or manufacture any evidence of fraud anywhere in the United States that would change the outcome. In Arizona, the cyber ninjas couldn't do it. In Georgia, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, we've seen this story time and again.
Well, gosh, I mean, the cyber ninjas actually, you know, despite all of their efforts, actually, their audit resulted in an increased margin in favor of Joe Biden, the ultimate irony of the whole thing. But as you point out, it isn't just happening in Wisconsin. It's happening across the country, right? In many states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, just to
around the dial.
Buck, you and I at one point in our careers received paychecks from CNN. We've talked privately, you know. It was a different world then. It was a different organization. It was always biased. It was always slanted. But it wasn't always completely and utterly insane.
CNN has completely lost its mind and lost its way, Will, and you and I both know that. When you see what does it really exist for, it's not unbiased journalism. And unlike other networks where they have opinion hosts and people that are presenting straight news, what you have at CNN is the pretense that the whole thing is a nonpartisan journalistic enterprise, which is laughable to anybody who has even the faintest connection to American politics and the narrative these days. But let's just be honest about what happened. Donald Trump broke them. Donald Trump is what caused CNN to completely go off the deep end. He called them fake news, and then a lot of people turned around and said, hold on a second. They are acting like fake news. They are trying to stack the deck and pretend that they're not at the same time. And look, I also wish that we did have more places we could air out our grievances. You won't see
the 21st century when Barack Obama wasn't on the ballot. It was not a close election. Right. And to see this kind of denial, and it's not just in the states like Arizona and Wisconsin and Georgia where the margin was close, we're seeing attacks on election officials and denial of election results in places like Florida, Texas, and California. That's how much this toxic sickness has spread.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
In a Sioux Falls neighborhood, Beth Warden spoke with him about his plans and brings us.
Grab those devices. We're going to give away some money here.
Or wildfires or drought. And that link, when you start to go down really small to the storm scale versus the large climate scale system, makes these types of questions very, very hard to unpack from a scientific perspective.
When you talk about sort of looking backward to try to figure it out, what have we seen? What changes have we seen in tornadoes in recent years?
Great question. Really, the only thing that we can hang our hat on right now is a pretty significant downward trend in the Great Plains of the United States. So you think of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, your colloquial tornado alley. They've actually seen a decrease in the number of significant tornadoes there over the last 40 years. And there's been a significant increase in places in the Mid-South, like Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, some of these areas that have been hit hard recently. And I think that's a really important thing because we have a lot more assets, a lot more people as you get east of the Mississippi River due to the increased population density.
Any idea of what that tells us or what that suggests, why that might be, that shift?
We think it's partly due to climate change and partly due to natural variability. To what extent, what percentage of that shift is being caused by climate change? These are all questions that are really good and that our research groups like us at NIU are still trying to unpack.
And what are the implications for the future from your research and what you're learning from your research?
Well, I think there's two things. I think we want to understand what the future holds for these extreme events like those of Friday evening. And on the flip side, we also want to understand the changing footprint of society. Both of those go hand in hand in understanding the future of tornado disasters like what we witnessed last week. And I'll tell you, looking ahead, even here tomorrow, it looks like another significant severe weather event possible across the Siouxland area. It only takes one event, right, to make your day, one tornado event to make your day a very bad day. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions about what happened to that Amazon warehouse and what happened to that candle factory on Friday evening.
Victor Gensini of Northern Illinois University, thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Expense.
This fight is at a crisis point. And while the focus is often on the Manchin and cinema games, what is lesser known and lesser seen is the nonstop, on-the-ground protests that are escalating over voting rights and economic justice. It's a fight that has taken on extreme measures. Joe Madison, the legendary host of Joe Madison, the Black Eagle on SiriusXM, has been on a hunger strike since November 8th. That is 37 days. And he isn't the only one. Joining me now is voting rights activist Joe Madison. And Georgia Linden, a student at the University of Arizona who's also on a hunger strike for voting rights. Thank you both for being here. Joe, I first have to ask you, how are you doing?
There are good days. There are bad days. Today wasn't necessarily one of the best physically, so I took time to rest so that I could be here with you. But I'm going to do what has to be done, and I can't tell you how proud I am, and to see the commitment, particularly from the young people from Arizona and even West Virginia. They remind me very much of when John Lewis was very young and did sit-ins and demonstrations, and they are just a continuation. This is important, but my spirit's joy being lifted because senators are telling me to keep it up. Hit the streets, virtual, text, call. There appears to be, they are, senators like Warnock and others are committed to getting this done by the end of the year. So that's it's up to us now. That's really what it boils down to. Yeah.
So rather than telling you to keep it up, maybe what they could do is pass the bill. Here's Senator Warnock. He gave an exclusive interview to NBC News, and this is what he said, because they changed the rules when they needed to in order, they saved the economy by changing the rules, but they changed the rules when they needed to. Sure didn't take them long, and Manchin went along with it.
Times. Yeah.
50 of them, and all 50 of them, including Manchin and Sinema, voted for it. So here's Senator Warnock earlier today.
All right.
We think it's so important that we change the rule in order to get there. In order to save the economy. Well, the warning lights on our democracy are blinking right now. And we seem unwilling to respond with the same urgency to protect the democracy that we have, to protect the economy.
Georgia Linden, I have to ask you also how you're doing. This is your 9th day on a hunger strike. You are not 72, as my friend Joe Madison is, but you are still a human being who needs sustenance and food, you know, who needs sustenance to live. So how are you doing?
I won't lie to you. It's very difficult. The hunger comes in waves, but as Mr. Madison knows, this is an urgent issue, so it requires urgent action.
But you're in Arizona. Has your senator, Kyrsten Sinema, who is in the way of getting voting rights done, has she reached out to you and your colleagues?
My colleagues and I met with Senator Sinema earlier last week. She reiterated her support for this act, however, stood strong in not carving out rules of the filibuster to push this act forward.
What did she say she's going to do instead?
She said she would support it if it came up to vote again, but she's not willing to go out of her way to make that happen.
In other words, I mean, this is the problem, Joe, is that it requires the people who have power to give a damn. And it's clear that that lady does not give a damn about voting rights, because if she did, she'd do what she did when she voted to change the rules to pass the debt ceiling, right? Yeah. And so my challenge, my question to you is the same. What have senators actually said to you they're going to do? Because if they don't care enough to save the lives of people who are clearly on the side of democracy, I don't know what else to tell them.
Well, what I've been told is what we should do. Maybe she didn't comes across now as not giving a damn, but maybe she gives a damn about her job. Because quite candidly, and my message would be to Senator Sinema, you're going to lose. And this is what the people of Arizona are telling you. You will lose. You will not be back in the Senate. And there are senators who understand that at this point in time, yes, they have the power to carve out the filibuster. And many of them are now approaching that. They're now talking about it. That's what I'm hearing from the senators. We're talking about it. We are trying to figure it out. And I know, Joy, because you and I have known each other a long time, and I can see in your face the skepticism. But this is when people must speak up. This is when we must pray. So what I've been told is everybody use whatever resource you have and contact these senators and tell them to do it so that people know. Eric Holder was on my show today, and he said, look, they have carved out the filibuster more, what did he say? Like they carve a turkey. They've done it 160 times since 1969. And this, you know, what your segment before you just did, let me tell you what will happen if the House loses. Let me tell you what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. This country will flip. And so it's now up to, this is up to us. And that's what I've been told. And I believe that they need to hear from everybody that this is the cornerstone of democracy, is the vote. It all starts with our vote.
And I'm just going to let folks know there are lots of people who are protesting. You guys are doing what you're doing, which is super brave. But Bishop Barber is out there. Black Ones Roundtable have been out there. Everyone is out there. So please, senators, do something, please. Joe Madison, Georgia Linden.
Loose. Yes.
Indeed. Well, you all, I wish you well. I truly do, and hope that this works. Thank you very much. Tonight's absolute worst. Thank you. It's still ahead. But first, U.S. Senate candidate Charles Booker joins us to talk about the heartbreaking aftermath of those devastating tornadoes in his home state of Kentucky and several neighboring states. And the U.S. House will vote on criminal contempt charges against Mark Meadows at any moment. So stay with us.
Do I need to pre-treat my laundry? Nope. With Tide Pods, you don't need to worry. The pre-treaters are built in. Tide Pods dissolve even when
this pandemic to end. That song is about as long as the pandemic. I'm sure it will go platinum.
We are now
having to live with that we now have this ginormous debt.
Probiotic oat formula moisturizes to help prevent dry skin.
And in addition to that, there are no resources. So if we're going to fix this problem, we're not going to have amnesia and forget about these things that we do over and over again. We have to devote resources, and we have to have leaders that are committed to actually solving these problems.
Larry Lewis, thank you very much.